This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 704 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Before getting to the mailbag questions this week, I want to remind you about FanDuel Face-Off. FanDuel Face-Off is where you compete in quick, fun games against other real people for real cash. It has all sorts of games that you're familiar with, like Home Run Derby, Wheel of Fortune, puzzle and strategy games, and there's more on the way. Contests are action-packed and last between 2 to 5 minutes, so you can play on your couch, waiting in line, during a commercial break, wherever, and on your schedule. Plus, you can practice for free anytime. Whether it be head-to-head, multiplayer, or larger tournaments, FanDuel Face-Off has something for you. Plus, in most contests, you'll be matched against players of similar skill level, so you're never totally overmatched, even as a beginner. Face-Off is also tied to your FanDuel account and wallet, so you can easily use your daily fantasy funds or sportsbook winnings in the app. Visit FanDuel.com/faceoff or download the FanDuel Face-Off app in the Apple App Store today to get in the game. Age and location restrictions apply, void where prohibited. See FanDuel.com/faceoff-terms for terms and conditions. The first question this week is from @Covey'sBurner, and it says, how do you see the fit with Chase Claypool and Justin Fields, and do you think him and or Mooney have increased fantasy value with this trade? So if you didn't hear, Chase Claypool is now a Chicago Bear. And the obvious huge problem with the Bears' passing attack is volume. I've said a lot about how the Falcons are operating offensively, but Chicago's got an even lower pass rate this season than the Falcons do. They're pacing to have the lowest pass rate of any team by far since 2011. They just don't like throwing the ball. They haven't had a single game this year where they had more pass attempts than rush attempts. I don't see how this changes dramatically with Chase Claypool. I do think that we may see a slight bump, but we may not even be able to credit that bump to Claypool himself. Game script can really influence those numbers too. Let me put it to you this way. On the season, Chicago wide receivers have a 65% target share. They've seen 65% of their team's targets. That's actually well above the league average this year, which is closer to 59-60%. Now, despite this, Bears wide receivers have seen just 101 targets. Their per-game numbers are well below the league average. I mean, the team itself is averaging fewer than 20 targets per game just in general. The Bears as a team have 7 more targets per game than Cooper Kupp. It's really hard for me to think that this is a good thing for someone like Mooney or even Claypool. I think the fit for Claypool is probably better. He's able to get down the field, and Justin Fields throws at 15 or more air yards at the highest rate in the league. So we may see more splash plays from Chase Claypool. But Claypool was still maintaining about a 17% target share per game in that Pittsburgh offense. Even if he gets to like a 25% share in Chicago, and that's pretty generous. At their current pace, he'd see a dip going from Pittsburgh to Chicago of well over a target per game, with a 25% target share. The Steelers are generating 16 more targets per game than the Bears are right now. That's not insignificant. And these targets in Chicago will probably be more efficient targets. The Bears are averaging like 1.5 yards more per pass attempt this year than the Steelers are. But let's not sit here and pretend that he's going to the Chiefs. I don't think you're going to be excited about starting Claypool or Mooney as plug-and-play guys given this current Bears offense. Because this should hurt Mooney's target share a little bit. Justin Fields, though, all day. This only makes me feel even more bullish about Fields over the next handful of weeks. This next question is from Patreon. It's from Brad. It says, hey, JJ, thanks for all the help so far this year. I hope you and your family had a good Halloween. We did. How do you feel about Davante Adams' rest of season? Is he a trade target after his poor performance, or should I be scared off? Thanks. So I was close to making Adams a buy this week on the 15 Transaction Show. What happened in Week 8 likely won't happen again. Just a 13% target share, 1 catch. He still has a 29% target share in the season. He's averaged a target share per game prior to last week of well over 32%. His usage is clearly fine. And on the schedule front, the Raiders don't have it that bad long term. Short term, not the best. Over the next 4 weeks, they actually have the worst schedule by my adjusted fantasy points allowed method for wide receivers. That's because they get the Colts, Broncos, and Seahawks after this week. That's not great. But in the fantasy playoffs and after that stretch, things look a lot better. And matchups only go so far. You want volume and talent first and foremost, and Adams has that. So if you can actually buy low on that performance, and if you're looking at the playoffs, he's totally fine. If you need a win as soon as possible, he's a little bit iffier after this week because of the schedule. But he should still be fine enough. It's Devontae Adams after all. This next question is from Twitter from @SSAVinny, and it says, the outlook for Toney and Pacheco. I think we should be excited about Toney's landing spot overall, being traded to the Chiefs. It's hard to envision a better real football fit. The Chiefs will be able to get him in motion, get him the ball in space. That's where Toney does his damage. The problem is, I don't know if we'll see huge production right away. He's more talented than what they have, but a young wide receiver who's still growing with the position, getting traded midway through the season, that doesn't scream wide receiver 2 to me. I think he's worth a dart throw, yes. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, this match is perfect, but temper those expectations. And with Isaiah Pacheco, he's also worth a hold. Pacheco's more of a hold than Toney is. He played more snaps than Clyde Edwards-Helaire the last time when we saw the Chiefs, and he's their best traditional power runner in that backfield. So not only does he have a shot to clean up in garbage time, but as he continues to grow, remember, he's a 7th-round rookie, but he could just naturally see more work. And the nice part about Pacheco is that he has some outs. He could take over that backfield naturally, or at least see more work. But he also has more upside if either Jerick McKinnon or Clyde Edwards-Helaire get hurt. That's why he's a valuable asset. It may not come to fruition. Pacheco may not be anything more than a random fill-in from here on out. But he's the kind of running back to have sitting on your bench, especially this time of year. This last question is an email, and it says, JJ, as always, amazing work on the pod. Thanks. Can you speak to positive playoff schedules by position? I think it would be helpful to start to understand targets when preparing for the playoffs. Thanks, John. So I'll talk about the good and the bad. On Wednesday, I published a chart to the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon that shows how each position by team stacks up during weeks 15, 16, and 17 in adjusted fantasy points allowed. Basically, what each position's schedule looks like. You can check that out by going to lateround.com, clicking Patreon, and becoming a patron. Some highlights, though. San Francisco has 3+ matchups for Garoppolo in weeks 15 through 17. In their week 16 and 17 games, those are really good against the Commanders and Raiders. On the flip side, the aforementioned Bears have it really tough. They get the Eagles and the Bills in weeks 15 and 16. Then they get the Lions in week 17. And there's a very real chance that Joe Mixon is a sell candidate on next week's 15 transaction show. And it's because of their playoff schedule. The Bengals get the Bucks, Patriots, and Bills during weeks 15 through 17. Those are all pretty rough matchups. But on the plus side for running backs, Derrick Henry. Get ready for that. They get the Chargers and the Texans in weeks 15 and 16, and then the Cowboys in week 17. So those week 15 and 16 games are really, really good for Derrick Henry. If he has a bad week this week, he might be a buy low candidate. With tight ends, we really shouldn't worry about schedule that much because those guys don't see a lot of volume. If you have a tight end who's seeing volume, that's what's most important. And then at defense, I talked about my favorite buy defense on the 15 transactions episode, which is Baltimore. But you can get more detailed numbers over on the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon if you're interested. I obviously can't read the entire table on this podcast because we'd be here for like 2 hours. This next question is from Twitter. It's from @AlStocko. It says, are we at the point where Jamal Williams is a start no matter what Swift's status is? Thank you for all the great content and hard work, JJ. Jamal Williams should be in fantasy lineups as long as DeAndre Swift is banged up. But I don't think that we can just confidently declare that he's a plug-and-play starter with a healthy DeAndre Swift. He's definitely a good player to have on your roster. He can be a great flex play. But you're saying no matter what here, no matter what DeAndre Swift's status. I think that's a little bit extreme. DeAndre Swift's been banged up. He hasn't played a whole lot of snaps this year. Basically since week 1, where he played 66% of Detroit's snaps against Philadelphia. That game just happened to be a super high-scoring game. Jamal Williams found the end zone twice. That really saved his fantasy day. He had 30 total yards otherwise. Williams saw by far his worst running back rush share of the season in that game to go along with a 5% target share. So his peripherals were unsurprisingly worst when Swift played the most that he's played all year. And then Swift hasn't played a ton of snaps since. Williams is someone who has benefited from a couple of things. Number one, Swift's injury, but also Detroit's high-scoring contests at home. I mean, there's a very, very, very direct correlation between Jamal Williams doing well and the Lions' offense playing in shootouts. which has happened a lot this year. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we see these spiked weeks from Williams, we have to recognize that situation is playing a large role. The Lions have played in 5 games this year out of 7 where the game total went over 50 points. In the other 2 games, Jamal Williams scored 6 and 7 PPR points. And that was without DeAndre Swift. Those types of scoring environments might continue. And we have to be open to that. We have to be open to that idea. But their home games, which is where this has happened most frequently, they're against the Packers, Bills, Jags, Vikings, and Bears from here on out. There are some tough matchups in there. And there are some opponents like the Bears where there's less of a chance of a true shootout. I guess my point here is that yes, Williams is a pretty good fantasy asset. He's seeing goal line work in an offense that's capable of these blow-up games. The problem is that it's really hard for us to just definitively say that he's a no-doubt starter when Swift returns, that he's a plug-and-play guy. Because he had his worst usage of the year when Swift played a lot in week 1. So for now, you can keep playing Jamal Williams. Swift remains injured. When Swift is fully 100%, and if the Lions use him like he's 100%, which is a big if, then Williams will suffer. There will be less production from Jamal Williams, just naturally. So I guess my answer to your question is that no, I don't think he's a plug-and-play starter. He's a must start if DeAndre Swift is healthy. But he's definitely a good fantasy asset to have. This next question is from @JSage222. It says, is Deontay Johnson due for touchdown regression? Or is his ADOT keeping him from the potential of making big plays this year? So I wrote about this in detail in the late round draft guide this year, but regression is different for every player. If you and I play golf together and you typically shoot around an 85, I typically shoot around a 90, then those are the numbers that we'd expect to regress to, right? If we had a bad round, we'd expect to get closer to that average, that mean, the next time we played. It's no different in football. Deontay Johnson actually doesn't have that low of an ADOT this year. It's completely average among high-volume wide receivers. The Steelers' offense is just absolute trash. They've scored the fewest offensive touchdowns in the league to start the year. So that situation that he's in, where he sees his targets, how frequently he's seeing them in the end zone or in the red zone, all of that plays into what his expected touchdown number should be. And considering he's seen production this year, but he hasn't scored, his expected touchdowns is not 0. Clearly. The man has 372 receiving yards. Even if he was seeing all of his targets in really bad situations, he would be expected to have more than 0 touchdowns. So we need to sort of shift the way that we think about regression. It's not that players won't regress if they have weird usage. It's just the degree in which we should expect that regression to hit compared to the average player. The Steelers' offense is so bad that while Deontay Johnson should score more touchdowns, especially now that Chase Claypool's gone, those opportunities won't be there like they would for the Chiefs or the Bills. If Deontay Johnson were doing this exact same thing in the Bills' offense, we would feel a lot better. But yes, he is due for regression. Even in this Steelers environment, he should have probably 2 or 3 touchdowns. That's just based on his usage. It's just that if this were a different environment where he was seeing this exact same usage, that number would be even higher. The last question this week is from @ShannonMac007, and it says, which fantasy football relevant player was the biggest winner at the trade deadline? So I'll go through a few. Speaking of Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and the Steelers, while I do think Claypool being gone can help Johnson, I think the bigger winners are George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth. Claypool leaves behind a 17% target share. That's going somewhere. This isn't a vacated targets thing. This is a vacated target share thing, which is very real because target share always adds up to 100%. So when a piece of that is gone, it's going to be filled by someone. And Pickens has more to gain there than Johnson does. Pickens has seen his target share dip the last couple of weeks from 14% to 7.5%. So this could be exactly what he needs to get back on track. And with Freiermuth, Chase Claypool has played 79% of his snaps from the slot this year. Some of those middle of the field looks will be shifted to Freiermuth now. Freiermuth has a 17% target share on the season, but without Claypool, I think he can be in like the low 20s now. That would be huge. So I think Freiermuth and Pickens are the 2 big winners from Pittsburgh. And I also think that Jeff Wilson is a winner. I alluded to this on the Sleeper Show this week, but Raheem Mostert has been the bell cow for Miami recently, yes. But the Dolphins don't make this move if they feel totally fine about their backfield. They haven't liked Chase Edmonds. They deal him away. And then they add a piece who's a much bigger threat to Raheem Mostert than Edmonds was. So yeah, about that 15 transactions recommendation earlier this week about buying Raheem Mostert, I would not be doing that anymore. I got new information, my opinion changed. Wilson has been good when he's got an opportunity. I'm not going to be that surprised if this backfield is more split than people think. And Wilson then has the upside of being that flex option plus a handcuff. If Mostert goes down, and we know that he hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his career, then Wilson is the lead back in a good offense. So I think Wilson is a very interesting buy candidate right now because he's cheaper than Raheem Mostert. And then let's look at Nyheim Hines. Hines gets a bump. He was seeing an 11% target share on the season, but he's going to a team that has basically doubled his former team in offensive touchdowns this year. The Bills have clearly been looking for this type of player. They drafted James Cook to be their receiving threat out of the backfield. That clearly is not working out. They don't make this move if they feel good about James Cook. Hines can line up everywhere too, and the Bills haven't found a ton of success from the slot this season. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them get creative with Hines and put him in the slot a little bit. I mean, he's played 21% of his snaps from that area of the field this year. You're really just buying the fact that a competitive team with one of the few elite offenses in the league, they went out and they handpicked Nyheim Hines and they traded for him. You can sit there and you can say, but they did this with James Cook and look how that worked out. But here's the difference. We know that Nyheim Hines is pretty good. We still have no idea with James Cook. He was a prospect. Nyheim Hines is a veteran. And that's why I think Nyheim Hines is a winner at the deadline. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Remember to check out lateround.com. Otherwise, good luck here in Week 9. Enjoy your weekend. I'll talk to you next week.